19 days before spring planting, I had 11 blades stacked at my own gate, and a man laughing at me over the top of them. Saturday, March 17th, 1962. The frost had come hard the night before, the kind that lays a skin of ice over the mud puddles and doesn't let go till 9 in the morning. I'd heard from Otto Reinke, who'd heard it from his cousin out toward Edgar, that 40 factory plowshares had snapped clean across the county overnight, laid up in barns where men were fixing to start their spring ground. I didn't know yet what that number would come to mean. I only knew it as a rumor passed over a fence, the kind you file away and don't trust until you've counted it yourself. The dealer's name was Merle Kessler, and he ran the implement lot on the north edge of Wausau, a low tin building with a John Deere sign bolted crooked above the door, green paint bleeding rust down through the letters. He came out in his canvas coat with his coffee still steaming, looked at my stack of blades leaning against the gatepost like they were something a dog had dragged up, and he laughed. Not mean exactly. Worse than mean. Easy. Like it cost him nothing. "Boy," he said, "you're asking $1.10 a share for scrap steel you pulled out of a ditch." "Foundry steel," I said. "Reforged, tempered proper." He picked one up, turned it over, ran his thumb along the edge I'd ground the night before by lamplight in the forge, and set it back down like it had disappointed him personally. "I got Deere shares in the shed cost $1 even, cast this year, straight off the truck from Moline. No farmer in this county's going to lay his crop money on some kid's homemade steel over a name he can trust." He said kid the way some men say a swear word, quiet, like he was being polite about it. "Your daddy'd have told you the same, if he was still around to tell you anything." I didn't answer that. Some things you let sit on the ground where a man drops them, because picking them up costs more than leaving them be. I had 19 days. 19 days until the ground dried enough for the plows to go in, and 19 days for word to travel. The frost that broke 40 shares in one night was still just a rumor from a cousin in Edgar, and Kessler's shed was full of the same brand of steel that had snapped. I didn't know that yet, not for certain. I only knew what I'd counted at my own gate. 11 blades, cooled and marked, my father's stamp cut into each one with a cold chisel, waiting on a man's word to mean something. Kessler got back in his truck. He didn't slam the door. He didn't need to. I carried the blades back to the barn myself, one at a time, and I started counting the days different after that. Not toward planting anymore, but toward whatever was coming for those 40 broken shares, and for mine. 18 days now. I ought to start further back than a truck door and a man who didn't slam it, because none of that means much without the rest of it laid out plain. The place is 80 acres off County Road N, 4 miles east of Wausau, Marathon County, Wisconsin, my grandfather's land before it was my father's, and my father's before it dropped into my hands, the way a hot iron drops when a man's grip finally gives out. Elmer Teal worked that ground for 31 years. He died on a Thursday in January, 2 winters back now, out past the granary with a shovel still in the snow beside him, and the doctor down in town called it his heart, though my mother always said the farm had been asking more of him than his heart could pay for some time. What he left me, besides the land and the stock, was a note at Farmers and Merchants Bank for $340, drawn against the equipment he'd bought the spring before he died, and a forge behind the barn that hadn't been fired in longer than I'd been alive to notice it cold. The foundry sits 6 miles off, on the Rib River side, and for 11 years, since before I can properly remember, since before my father's hair went the color of ash, they'd been hauling their cracked castings out our way and dumping them at the fence line where the county road bends. Nobody in Marathon County knows quite why they picked our gate over some other stretch of road. My father never asked them to stop. I think, some winters, he was glad of the steel, even broken. He'd walk the pile in December with his hands in his coat pockets, turning shares over with his boot, though I never once saw him do a thing with them beyond that. I did not understand, until this winter, that he had been doing something with them all along, just not out where a boy could see it. 18 days. The banknote sits at half paid, if you want to call sending Mr. Halverson $40 every few months paid, and the rest of it sits over my head, the way clouds sit over a hayfield before a storm you can smell, but can't yet name. That's the arithmetic I carried out to the forge every morning that February, before light, boots crunching the crust of old snow, breath going up ahead of me like something leaving before I did. $340, 11 years of scrap steel at my gate, and a man in town who'd looked at 11 blades and driven off without a word worth keeping. The forge itself is a low fieldstone hut my grandfather built in 1911 before he'd even finished the house, which tells you something about a man's priorities, or maybe just about a Wisconsin winter waiting for nobody. The stones are the kind you pull from a creek bed, rounded and gray, mortared close, and by February, the mortar has its own history of frost-heave cracks running through it like veins. 19 days to the planting date my father always kept, the first week of April, weather willing, and I had taken to counting them the way you count anything that scares you a little, out loud, under my breath, while I worked the bellows. The forge doesn't hold heat overnight, not in a Wisconsin February, so every morning is the same ritual. I'd shovel out yesterday's ash, gray and cold as the sky outside, lay new kindling, feed it up through pine scrap to coal, and stand there working the leather bellows handle until my shoulder ached, and the coal went from black to red to the orange my father used to call cherry but patient, though I didn't understand what patient meant about a color until later. 17 days. 16. The count didn't care whether I'd slept. It was on one of those mornings, a Tuesday I think, though the days had started running together the way chores do, that I noticed the stone. It sat about waist high on the north wall, to the left of the hearth, and it had always looked no different from its neighbors. Gray, rounded, mortared in tight. But the mortar around it had a hairline crack running clean around its edge, all four sides, like someone had cut it once and let it weather back into looking natural. I'd walked past that stone maybe 1,000 times in my life. I don't know what made me stop that particular morning, except that the light was low and coming in sideways through the forge door, catching the crack just right, the way frost catches a window at a certain hour and shows you the glass was never as clean as you thought. I didn't pull it that day. I had chickens to feed and a hog to slop and 15, I'd have to recount, days left before the ground would either hold or it wouldn't, and a boy learns early that curiosity is a luxury item on a farm, same as sleep. But I found myself looking at that stone every morning after, the way you look at a letter on the table you haven't opened yet, knowing whatever's inside it is going to change how you read yesterday. I went back to the bellows, the coal caught, 15 days, and somewhere behind that stone, something was waiting on me to finally be curious enough. 16 days now, and I still hadn't touched the stone. I told myself it was the hog again, or the water trough that needed breaking free of ice, or the fact that Mrs. Halverson wanted her sled runners sharpened by Thursday, and I hadn't started. A boy can find 100 reasons to keep his hands busy and his mind away from a thing that scares him a little. I wasn't scared of the stone. I was scared of what it might not have. I'd built up in my head some notion, foolish, probably, that behind it was going to be nothing but mouse droppings and a rusted-out coffee can somebody's hired hand left 40 years back, and I'd feel worse for having hoped. But Wednesday evening, chores done, the light gone, that deep blue color it gets in February, when the sun's down but the sky hasn't decided to let go of it yet, I stood in the forge with the fire banked low, and I put my thumbnail against the seam of that stone and worked it. It came easier than I expected. Somebody had set it back in there without mortar, just fitted tight, and 11 years of coal dust had done the rest of the disguising. I worked it loose with the flat of a cold chisel, careful, the way you'd coax a splinter, and it came free all at once, and near took my knuckles with it. Behind it was a coffee can. Hillsboro's, the paper label gone soft and brown, but the tin underneath still sound. I sat down right there on the dirt floor, with it in my lap, like it might spill. Inside were folded papers, maybe 30 of them, gone the color of weak tea, and on top, a stub of pencil, worn down to nothing. I unfolded the first sheet under the lamp, and there was my father's handwriting. The same cramped hand that used to write feed orders on the back of the rural electric bill, except here it was numbers and words I didn't know how to read yet. 1450 degrees, held 4 minutes, quench in brine, reheat to straw, second quench in oil. Dated at the top, June 1949. Then another sheet, another date, notes on color, cherry, blood orange, the pale gray blue he called ghost temper, like he was describing weather instead of steel. I went through the whole can twice before I let myself breathe right. 13 years he'd been keeping this. 13 years of firing that forge in front of me and never once saying what he actually knew, or maybe just waiting for me to be old enough to want it. I thought about him standing right where I was sitting, folding these same papers, sliding the stone back into place, like a man closing a drawer on something private. I didn't understand half of what was written there, but I understood enough to know it wasn't nothing. I banked the fire lower and sat there past dark, reading it a third time, while somewhere out past the fence line, under 16 more days of clear cold sky, the Foundry's scrap pile waited on me, same as it always had. I was 7 the first time he let me stand close enough to feel the fire on my knuckles. That was the summer of 1951, and he had a horseshoe going orange in the coals, turning it with tongs older than he was, and he said, "Watch the color, not the clock." I didn't know yet that he was quoting his own father when he said it. He'd point at the steel and name what he saw like it was a language only the two of us spoke. "Straw," he'd say. "That's for a chisel edge. You want it brittle hard, not soft." Then, turning it slower, "Peacock, blue-purple shot through like oil on a puddle. That's for a spring, something that has to bend and come back." He never wrote any of it down in front of me. He'd just say it, over and over, different seasons, different tools, until the words sat in me the way a hymn sits in a churchgoer who never learned to read music. I asked him once, maybe I was 10, where he'd learned it. He didn't stop hammering. Said my father taught me, same as I'm teaching you, out behind this same wall, before the county even ran a road past here. I knew the story in pieces, knew my grandfather had broken this land himself in 1911, walked it off with a team and a plow he built half of himself, put up the barn beam by beam before he ever put up the house. What I hadn't known, sitting there with the coffee can open on my knee 16 years later, was that the forge itself, the actual iron of it, had been teaching the same lesson 3 times over, without anybody writing a word down until my father finally did. I understood then why he never told me the charts existed. He didn't need charts. He had it in his hands, the way his father had it in his hands. Color and feel, and 4 minutes counted out by breath instead of a clock. He only wrote it down, I think, the year I was 6, the year the doctor first said something about his heart, that he didn't repeat to my mother in front of me. June 1949. He must have known even then that a day might come when the hands teaching mine would be gone, and the only thing left standing between me and forgetting would be ink on a coffee-stained sheet folded into a can behind a loose stone. I sat with that a long while, the fire dying to orange coals, then to nothing, then just gray ash, and the cold Wisconsin dark, pressing in through the cracks in the wall. 16 days. I thought about the scrap pile past the fence line, cracked and rusting and worthless to everyone in this county but me, and I thought, for the first time since the funeral, that maybe I wasn't starting from nothing after all. 4 days after I found the can, I walked the fence line with a burlap sack and stopped halfway down it, boots sunk in the melt mud, and asked myself a question I hadn't let myself ask straight out before. The Foundry man, Orville Krenz, dumped his rejects there because the county wouldn't let him bury scrap on Foundry land without a permit he'd never bothered filing. and because hauling it to the yard in Rib Falls cost more than the steel was worth to him. 11 years he'd been doing it. Nobody asked him for a nickel, and he never offered one. It was garbage to him. It was garbage the way a bent nail is garbage, the way a cracked churn is garbage. Not stolen, not fenced, just left where the world had agreed it meant nothing. But if my blades sold, if a farmer handed over cash for something I'd built out of what Krenz called junk, then the junk wasn't junk anymore, the minute it left my forge. I was making money off another man's discard, without so much as a word passed between us. I stood there long enough that my feet went numb through 2 pairs of socks, turning that over the way you'd turn over a stone, to see what's living under it. I thought about my father at the kitchen table with a coffee can of bent nails, straightening every one on the flat of the anvil before he'd let my mother throw them out. I thought about the hinge off the old smokehouse door he'd cut down and refit onto the chicken coop rather than order a new one from the catalog for 60 cents. He never let a usable thing lie there being useless just because somebody with more money had decided it was beneath noticing. That wasn't stealing. That was the opposite of waste, which was its own kind of honesty, maybe the only kind a poor man could afford. Krenz hadn't asked for the shares back in 11 years. He wouldn't miss steel he'd already written off twice, once when it cracked in the mold, and once when it hit my fence line and stopped existing for him at all. If I paid him for it, I'd be paying for something he considered worth nothing, which would only confuse him and slow me down, and I had 12 days. So I decided, standing in the mud with the sack half full, that I'd take what was thrown away and turn it into something a man would pay for, and if Krenz ever asked, I'd tell him plain. Not sneak around it, not pretend I hadn't. That was the line I set for myself. Walking back toward the barn, with the sack heavier on my shoulder than it had any right to be for scrap. 12 days left before the ground went soft enough for plowing, and I still didn't have proof the blades would hold. Only the charts, and the coffee can, and my father's 4 minutes counted out by breath. The forge held heat like an old grudge, and I fed it slow that morning, working the bellows until the coals went past orange into a color my father's charts called cherry deep, not the brightest stage, the one 2 below it, held for exactly 4 minutes before the first quench. I laid the first cracked share on the anvil face up, watched the color climb through the metal like weather moving across a field, and pulled it the instant the edge went the shade the coffee can pages called for. First quench in oil, count of 10, second quench in brine, and set it aside to cool on its own time, instead of rushing it under the pump. The first blade came out sound. I could tell by the ring of it against the anvil horn. A clean note, not the dull thud of the ones Krenz had thrown out. The second one I rushed. I pulled it too soon, maybe 30 seconds shy of the full 4 minutes, because my hands were cold, and I wanted to get back inside before the stock needed feeding. It went into the oil brittle instead of tough, and when I tapped it to test the edge, it split clean through, the crack running the whole width of the blade like it had been waiting there all along, just biding time until I gave it permission to fail. I was standing over the ruined piece, turning it in my hands, when I heard the gate latch behind me. He didn't say hello first. He picked up the good blade off the bench, turned it edge up to the light, and ran his thumb along the hammer marks near the heel. "Someone taught you to draw a bevel like that," he said. "Elmer didn't hammer that pattern himself. His own father did, before him. I'd know it in the dark." He told me he'd worked that same forge as a hired hand, back when my grandfather was still breaking new ground behind a team of Belgians, before either of us had been born to worry about any of it. He picked up the split blade next, turned it over once, and set it down without comment, which told me more than words would have. "You pulled it early," he said. Not a question. I told him about the 4 minutes, the coffee can, the whole business of it, and he nodded like a man checking off items he already expected to hear. 4 minutes is a guess dressed up as a number, he said. Watch the color instead. The can gave you a starting point. Your eyes have to finish the job. He stayed 2 hours that afternoon, and came back the next, and the one after that, standing at my shoulder, while I drew shares from the fire, and asking me to name the color before he would. Straw. Then a deeper straw, going toward purple at the edges, and that was the line. Past it and the steel went brittle no matter what the can said. He never touched the hammer himself. He'd put his hands in his coat pockets and just watch, and correct me with 4 or 5 words at a time, and by the third day I wasn't guessing colors anymore. I was seeing them. 19 days had gone to 11, and 11 had gone to 8, and in that stretch, I finished 5 shares I'd have staked the farm on. Clean edges, no hairline cracks under the glass, the temper holding steady clear through to the heel. 8 days left before the ground would tell us whether any of it mattered. I engraved my father's mark into each one the night I finished the 5th. A cold chisel, a candle stub for light, because I didn't want the lantern's hiss in my ears while I worked, and the barn gone quiet except for the tick of the cooling forge behind me. The mark was simple, a T inside a plowshare outline, worn soft on the old punch from however many 100 times his hand had done this before mine. I set the chisel against the steel and struck it careful, 4 taps, angle steady, and did that 5 times over, 1 for each blade. And when I was done, I laid them side by side on the bench, like a man laying out cards he wasn't sure he should be showing. I priced them that night too, working the numbers by lamplight in the ledger, the coal, the wear on the anvil face, the hours, my own labor which I priced at nothing, because there was nothing else to do with my evenings anyway. What I came to was $2.10 a share. The dealer in town was asking $3.80 for the factory ones. I sat looking at the difference a long while, turning the pencil in my fingers, telling myself it was fair, because my costs were lower, telling myself something else underneath, that I didn't look at straight, that I needed the sale more than I needed the principle of it, and that 8 days wasn't enough time to find out which was true. 8 days ran down to 1, and that one was a Tuesday. I want to tell it plain, because that's how it came, not with any thunder to announce it. The 3rd of April 1962, and the ground had been soft for a week, soft enough that Orville Kastner had already started turning his East 40 on Monday afternoon. The frost long gone by everybody's count. Spring settled in the way it settles in Marathon County by late March. Mud in the lanes, the creek up, robins back at the fence posts. Nobody was watching the sky that night. I wasn't either. I fed the stock, banked the forge, went to bed under 2 blankets, same as always. It came down clear and still around 2 in the morning, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself with wind, just settles. By 6, the thermometer nailed to the smokehouse read 19 degrees, and the ground that had been turned soft and wet the day before had gone to iron overnight. Froze hard right through, rock over rock, no give in it anywhere. I heard the first of it at the feed store before 8. Orville's plowshare had snapped clean at the neck, right in the middle of his East 40, and he wasn't the only one. Word came in pieces the way it does. A name, then another name, then a third. Delbert Grove's share gone, then the Roosh place, then 2 shares cracked at the Nystrom farm inside an hour of each other. All of it factory steel. All of it bought that spring off the same shelf in town, the same John Deere stock the dealer had been moving all winter at $3.80 apiece, and every one of them snapping the same way, right where the alloy had gone thin. By 10, the dealer's lot had 6 farmers standing in it, wanting shares he didn't have. I heard this from Mrs. Kastner herself, who drove past our lane on her way to the co-op and slowed just enough to holler it through her window. That the shelves behind the counter were bare of anything that would hold. That the dealer was on the telephone to Green Bay trying to get a truck sent up and getting told nothing could move before the weekend. Saturday was 5 days off. Nobody's ground stays frozen 5 days in April and then waits polite for you to plant it. A man loses his window. He loses weeks, not days. I stood in the yard a minute with the cold still biting through my coat, doing the arithmetic without wanting to. 6 blades finished and priced in the ledger at $210. Maybe a dozen more half-forged on the bench, needing only the second heat and the water to set them right. Old Henrik gone downstate to his daughters for the season. No telephone at that house to call him back, even if there'd been time. I went inside, got the ledger down off the shelf, and started figuring what a man could finish between now and Saturday if he didn't sleep much. The frost came Tuesday morning, April 3rd, and I heard about the snapped shares before I saw the dealer's truck. Mrs. Kastner's boy ran it up and down 2 roads on his bicycle like a paper route. 3 farms out past Rib Falls with cracked steel already. 2 more by noon. A man named Otto Fensky, who'd put in for 4 acres of oats and broke 2 shares before 9 o'clock trying. I was greasing the wagon axle when the truck came up the lane, slower than a man drives when he's got good news. It was the same green Ford, same rattling bed, but empty this time. No crates of factory shares stacked and shining. The dealer got out and stood by the gate a minute before he came through it, like the gate itself owed him an apology. His mouth worked before anything came out of it. I'd seen that before, in men owing money at the bank, in men about to ask for something they didn't want to ask for. "Teal," he said, "I need blades, whatever you've got finished." I didn't answer him right off. Old Henrik was at the fence. He'd come back up from his daughter's the evening before, unannounced. Said something in him didn't like leaving without knowing how the frost would fall. And here he was, leaning on a post with his hat pulled low, watching the way you watch weather come in. "I've got 6 finished," I said. "Dozen more not done." "I'll take the 6. He said a number for the scrap steel first. The same steel he'd once sold me for 3 cents a pound and called worthless. And it came out to near triple what he'd have gotten for it as junk. Because I wasn't selling him junk. I was selling him blades that held. I didn't say anything about that arithmetic. I went and got the 6 shares off the bench, laid them on the tailgate of his truck one at a time, my father's mark cut clean into each one where the cold chisel had bitten the metal. The dealer counted out bills into my hand, 12s and $1 bills, worn soft, and I counted them again after him, slow, not because I doubted him, but because a man ought to count money in front of the fellow who gave it to him. My hands didn't shake. I want to say that plain, because I noticed it myself, standing there. They didn't shake at all. He didn't thank me. He got back in the truck and sat a second with the door open, looking at the barn, at the forged chimney with its thin gray smoke, like he was seeing the place for the first time, though he'd driven past it 100 times going to town. Then he drove off, and I went inside and got the ledger down and wrote the sale in my father's hand of figures, the way he'd taught me before he ever thought I'd need to know it. Date, amount, item, nothing more. Henrik hadn't moved from the fence. "You didn't say a word to him," he said. "Didn't need to." He nodded slow, like that was the whole lesson, and looked toward the 6 half-forged blades still waiting on the bench. The word got around faster than I figured it would. By the 3rd week of April, Merle Kowalczyk drove out from the other side of the county, 16 miles, he said, though I never checked it, because his cousin had bought one of my blades off the dealer's own shelf and told him where it really came from. I sold Merle 2 shares at $4 apiece, and he paid in coin, counting it out on the tailgate like he didn't trust paper money, to be honest. That was the first sale that didn't come through town at all. The dealer didn't call it defeat. He wouldn't have used that word if you'd paid him to. What he did, starting the last week of April, was set 6 of my shares on a shelf just inside his door, next to the factory stock, with a little card that said, "Reforged, local, no price marked," like he hadn't decided yet whether to be proud of them or ashamed. Farmers asked for mine by name inside of a month. He raised the price twice that summer, and I never said a word about it either way. A man's allowed to make his margin. I kept the forge going through May planting, and into the haying season, evenings mostly, after the fieldwork was done and the light was long enough to still see color in the steel. Henrik came by twice more before he left for his daughter's place downstate for good that October. Not just the season this time, he said. His knees had decided the matter for him. And the last thing he told me, standing at the gate with his hat already on, was that my father would have been insufferable about it, proud in that quiet way that made you want to hit him. I didn't say anything back. I just shook his hand longer than a handshake needs to go. By the first week of October 1962, I'd paid the banknote down by half, $170 against the $340, in 4 separate trips to farmers and merchants. Each one counted out same as the first. Mr. Halverson didn't call me son by then. He called me Mr. Teal, which felt strange enough that I laughed about it once, alone, walking back to the truck. The rest of that year and the next, the forge earned a kind of name I hadn't set out to earn. Men from Rib Mountain, from up past Merrill, from clear over toward Stevens Point, started showing up with cracked shares in the truck bed asking, could I fix theirs instead of them buying new? I kept every ledger entry the same way. Date, amount, item, nothing more. The way my father had, the way I figured his father had before him, back when the forge was new and the land wasn't broken yet. Some nights, closing up the forge, I still think about that coffee can. 11 years it sat behind that loose fieldstone, through 2 winters of my father dying by inches from something the doctor never named right. Through a year, I spent so angry at the ground I could barely walk it. Through every scrap share the Foundry dumped at my fence line like they were doing me a favor. 11 years of dust settling on paper that already knew the answer. Nobody hid it from me on purpose, I don't think. My father just ran out of time to hand it over the regular way, mouth to ear, the way it's supposed to go between a man and his son. So it waited instead. Paper waits better than people do. It doesn't get impatient, doesn't get old, doesn't die on a Tuesday in January with the note still owed. It just sits in the dark, being exactly what it always was, until somebody with reason enough to look finally moves the right stone. I think about how close I came to never finding it, how if the winter of '62 hadn't been the winter it was, if the frost had come 2 weeks later, or the dealer hadn't laughed quite so loud, I might have gone on stacking those cracked shares as scrap, same as everybody else, never once wondering what a 2-stage quench might do that I didn't already know. The knowledge was never lost. It was just waiting on somebody stubborn enough, or desperate enough, to ask the wall a question. I banked the fire low, same as every night, and stood there a minute in the smell of coal smoke and cooling iron, listening to the barn settle the way old barns do after dark. I've thought since then about all the drawers in all the houses in this county that nobody's opened in 40 years. The trunk in somebody's attic with a name stitched wrong on the lid. The ledger in a root cellar nobody's read since the war. The tool with initials worn half smooth that everybody assumes is just a tool. Most of it's nothing, I expect. Some of it isn't. You don't know which until you look. That's the whole of what I've got to tell you, sitting here with the fire down to coals and October coming on cold outside. Somebody thought enough of you, once, to leave something behind for you to find, even if they never got the chance to say so out loud. It might be sitting in a coffee can right now, in a wall you've walked past 1,000 times. If this is the kind of story you want more of, stay a while, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what's sitting unopened in your own family's barn. I'd like to hear it.